With Florida Atlantic University, working on the Cube Plant project. My name is Vitas Dictanis Jr. I am a PhD candidate working for my mechanical engineering degree, concentration in aerospace.
I'm Sky Ruff. I'm a junior going for my mechanical engineering degree.
I'm Jonathan Mazurkowitz, and I'll be finishing up my bachelor's in computer engineering, starting my master's in the spring.
Take it away, guys.
So as humanity ventures away from Earth into the moon and Mars, feeding our astronauts becomes essential. Our current method of supplying food, launching it on demand, is costly and lacks necessary nutrients for long-term travel. Growing plants in space is the logical next step for rapid local food production. This feat will prove challenging as we navigate issues like microgravity, with its lack of convection and plant directionality, and cosmic radiation damaging cell DNA and increasing mutation. Space plant farming on the ISS is limited and requires human interaction. Developing an autonomous CubeSat payload for plant farming research is the next step towards colonizing space.
So quick question.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a botanist on the team or that you guys are consulting with? Just curious.
There's a botanist at the FAU that we are consulting with. He's not one of our PIs, but we do have, yes.
Just making sure.
Yes.
Right, thanks. Like me as an engineer, I don't know anything about plants and all that.
Us as well.
We're learning a lot. All right, so let's talk about the people who would benefit from our mission being a success. So we're most closely in alignment with NASA and their Artemis program. So if we want to colonize, have a long-term presence on the moon, Gateway being involved with that, Veggie obviously being to support Gateway and Artemis. They're really right in alignment with what we're trying to do here. We also have Florida Atlantic University. So our College of Engineering and Computer Science, our Biological Sciences department, we've been working closely together for a couple of years now, starting to develop how to go about solving this mission. And if this mission goes well, obviously the interest in both those programs would hopefully increase, draw in initial stakeholders, things of that nature. And one of our real hopes that would be great we could achieve would be beginning a CubeSat initiative program at FAU. Along with an aerospace, we don't currently have an aerospace major. So if all of these go well, there's a lot of people are impacted by that. And then we also have the DoD, AFRL namely, and underneath that, Space Force. So there may be a subset of missions that are off the table and are infeasible until we can reach the place where we can grow plants on the moon and beyond. Right, so for our actual statement, the goal of our mission is to observe plant development in space for the purpose of analyzing the effects of microgravity and cosmic radiation. Now to achieve that, we have 3 objectives. So first, which maintain our environmental control system. ECS for short, you'll see us say that a lot. Within the necessary conditions, so there's a range, it must stay within those conditions for facilitating plant germination and growth. Secondly, we'd like to monitor the radiation types and levels inside and outside of ECS while in LEO. This will show that our payload can effectively withstand growing in a more highly radiation environment. And thirdly, we have to transmit and receive the sensor and image data. If we can't get this data back down to Earth, we'll never know that it happened. It serves us no purpose.
I think you should expand upon necessary conditions.
We will be.
In the next few slides, we have a breakout of all these conditions and the parameters and ranges that are acceptable.
Yeah, like a full breakout with detail.
Okay, then I would at least point to it then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good call.
Yeah, because like just from like a pure objective, like objectives are used. Well, I guess success criteria says whether or not it failed, but I guess I just don't like the wording of necessary conditions, but I'm glad that you have that criteria. And then for 3, you said like, as long as we want to get this data down, then I guess like why is retransmitting sensor and image data back to the satellite, or you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure it was clear that if we transmit it, but we don't receive it on the ground station, that it's useless as well. So I guess it was just to be clear, we need to transmit and receive on the ground station the data that we're sending.
So end-to-end communications.
Okay.
I don't normally deal with plant missions, but is mission objective one an answer stating that you have to have an environmental control system, or is, since we're dealing with plants, is it allowed? So you're maintaining an environmental control system, so that's stating that the only way to grow plants is to have that system. Is there a different way of doing it in space? Or do you have to maintain that? And
If
that's
there-
why on a standard mission, that would be a solution to an objective.
Are you asking if one of the objectives is to prove that their system works for this purpose?
Well,
I think you're saying that your goal is
Yeah.
to maintain an environmental system.
Yeah.
You're assuming that you need to maintain,
Yeah, you're assuming that you need that.
If we don't, the plants are either gonna freeze or cook.
and you're showing that you're gonna be able to do that, so your plants can actually survive.
To answer your question, yes.
Okay,
we
so
really
you do need that.
keep-
Okay.
For this application, yes.
Okay, that's,
How we
got
do
it.
it is up to change.
okay, so that is not some system that somebody else built that you're
No,
validating.
correct.
That
No,
is,
we are gonna
okay,
have
so
to
you're
build
still
our own.
figuring that out. Okay,
He suggested their name table.
got it.
your statement makes a good point. That this is a very almost binary mission objective.
It's a,
Right,
it's
there's
an
not a-
interesting mission. It's a different mission, yeah.
Hypotheses usually have a range of experimentation or something to go, I understand. You see my point? I mean, you could say I maintain the environmental system controls, but is the temperature have to be at a certain level, can go up, can go down?
I
There's
think
a-
it's
an acceptable
That's-
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
what
there
you're-
is an, okay,
And
okay.
we'll discuss the target and range.
But you have a requirements chart, right? You have a requirements chart where you're gonna go through all these different environments.
Okay.
But also they're talking about life, so it is kind of like, it's
Yeah.
either alive or
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's
Yeah,
like-
okay, so,
Yeah.
there are experiments you can do within the Air Force Academy has proposed a similar set of projects, and they have a set of control elements, and they vary some of the variables within each plant, very small. And then they have a test setup on the ground where that's their control system. So I guess I'll keep going, but I guess I'm having a little. I want to see what the experimentation is, and hopefully it's not just a binary.
Yeah, and I hope that we can answer that
Okay,
effectively, and
all right.
if not, I look forward to hearing the feedback.
Yeah, I think that's why I initially poked at necessary conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Personally strike that, and I would put the parameters there that you actually are.
Yeah, we went back and forth, but.
Proper temperature, humidity, radiation.
Yeah,
I would name all your environments there that you're gonna be maintaining.
got it.
I do have a question. This might just be me, but your mission objectives flow from your mission statement. And to me, your statement says that you want to see how the plants are growing, and your objectives say you want to see the success of your system, right?
Right.
Regardless of how the plants do. Now, I understand that those are connected, but in your objectives, you only get to the actual welfare of the plants by mission objective 3. Right? Everything else you could do with a sensor and say, this is within what we know to be the acceptable range for the plants. And so I would say probably clarifying that a little bit. It sounds to me like your goal is more with the design of the system, and the plants are just a way to characterize that. That's correct. Then I would probably be a little bit more precise about how I encode that in the mission statement.
So then do you need plants? Because it's of the success of the system, you can do everything else with just sensors and monitor the space environment of
Sure.
how the system works.
Yes, that as well as the fact that in this extreme environment, plants might not be able to handle such an environment. So having that as a proof of concept that they
Okay.
can grow in this radiation environment, which we'll get into in microgravity, both of them in tandem prove to be pretty extreme for plants.
Do you know the optimum environment to grow a plant in
Yes.
microgravity?
Yes, we have a slide breakdown of all our optimal conditions.
And so then if you know that, then wouldn't you strike number 1 then?
So, this may clarify, may not, let me know. So, the ISS has already grown plants in space, right? And they've done it and they have your advanced plant habitat. Both of those require human interaction as of right now. There is no CubeSat that has plants growing on it as of right now. So the idea is that though what you're saying is true, if we just send up a payload with, no plants and we say, hey, it might have worked with plants, right?
Yeah.
But if we don't put the plants up there, how would we know? right? So the evidence of plant growth is more validating that the system works. That's the idea. Our objective isn't to make the plant grow and achieve the objective.
Okay.
So that's why you haven't highlighted like germinate
No.
or something.
Plant can die, and that's valuable.
Now, that does fall
Yeah.
into our minimum and full success criteria on the coming slides of how we kind of judge how well we performed, but it doesn't ensure success or failure of the mission.
I think we can keep going. I think there's some things that we're gonna get to.
Sure we will.
Yeah.
All right, great. So again, we have two main goals throughout our entire mission: to maintain that ECS and to collect and transmit the data that's received. So for all minimum, full, and our stretch criteria, the goal remains the same: maintain the ECS once the experiment begins, as well as to collect and transmit that data. Now, one key point is that the sensor data it should be sent reasonably quickly so we can make decisions in case something goes wrong. However, the images have no priority on this, as long as they get down eventually, that's acceptable. And then the ECS parameters, again, if our spacecraft sits up there for 2 weeks, that 7-day timer hasn't started yet. It's once we begin the experiment, which we have some initial prerequisite conditions, but for minimum full success, that 7 days shows the germination window. So we are expecting that once the experiment begins, once the soil substrate is about saturated, we have a range between 3 and 7 days for minimum success. And really a lot of our success for mission is tailored around that, achieving that minimum. Outside of that, we would love if we had a full success going through the entire plant life cycle.
So long as you germinate, you're good. It doesn't need to grow 5 inches, it can grow, just stick it out of the soil, you're good.
Correct. Never been done before.
You have seeds in space, and you have your whole commissioning and detumbling and every other phase like that.
Yep.
They are still exposed to radiation. Does that have any effect on the later germination of if your commissioning takes longer than expected?
Yes. So the hardiest part of a plant is when it's a seed. It's after that germination is when it is more susceptible to damage, especially. So way colder temperatures, hotter temperatures, pressure swings, all that the seed can withstand. But the second you start germinating is when you have to maintain that environment much more strictly. And we get into that as well as a key action in our experiment.
That's why our timer doesn't start the 7-day, 30-day. That doesn't start until we begin the experiment. Before that,
Okay.
they're dormant seeds. And then in the experiment, once we've gotten out of detumble and all that, which we'll show later on, that's when we actually start everything.
Yeah, so the box on the left is your success criteria, and it's hit at a minimum for 7 days.
Consecutive, yes.
Okay, and then 30 days consecutive.
Correct.
Sorry.
Any further typo on the 7 days?
No worries. Yeah, I'm poking again, but I can be patient about the ECS parameters. I can wait on that.
Right, so I've already mentioned most of this. You guys, our questions have prompted some of these, but I'll go through them in a little bit more detail now. So to maintain the ECS, 7 consecutive days after the experiment begins. For a full success, we'd love to go up until the microgreen growth stage, which is about the 14-day time window. That is where the plants will be harvested, and that's where they also have the optimal nutrient density. So in a real world circumstance, if we were to harvest them, that would be our full success here. For the radiation types and levels, again, at minimum 7 days, let's say an event happens and we've controlled all the parameters, we can infer or at least make conjectures on radiation having an effect on the seeds. I know it's a little bit wishy-washy, but it's possible. And then for full success, it would be until the end of the life of the mission. So there's no reason why we can't continue to monitor throughout the rest of the duration, even past that 30-day window for full success. For the transmission, we're using an RGB camera, we're capturing at 6-hour intervals. A 6-hour interval through talk with our biology department. It isn't exactly related to monitoring the level of the plants. He said one image a day would be fine. But we have no reason to not record every 6 hours as of right now. And that's TBR. So that may extend or lessen as needed. Again, for 7 days, as well as the sensor and image data down there. Full success, we continue again to go on through the microgreen growth stage, which is the other key benchmark point for us. And then for the stretch, we'd like to monitor the system for the remainder of the mission. So maybe a seal breaks at year 2 that we would have never learned about unless we continue to send down this sensor image data, or how long can we really operate this system forward, have it respond and work as we expect in space.
Is this end of life of the plant or the satellite?
Satellite. Any EOLs that you'll see will be in regards to the satellite.
Even after the plant supposedly dies.
Yeah, it's only gonna go 30 days. It only has enough water to last for 30 days. Because it would be harvested at 14 in real world. Real world settings.
So then after that point, after the plant dies, you still want to see how the system,
Right,
We want to see that we can still
Right.
maintain that.
test
system.
it, find the boundaries where we break.
Besides the camera, what other sensors are you guys want? Let's see.
We do have
Coming
like,
up.
a
We have
sensor
a whole
breakdown.
list
It's a
on that.
lot.
Quite a few.
I believe it's
Any other
around 20
questions?
sensors, so.
I have a semantics question for this portion of the room. Do you think they could just use the word downlink in place of transmit and receive at the ground station and it would convey the same idea?
Yeah, because when you say transmit, it feels like
Feels like
I'm giving all of that information back up.
I
Yeah,
understand.
downlink implies that you received it.
it's a full gun.
Got it. Right, some key factors that are driving our mission. Talk about them. So launch vehicle restrictions. We are setting up a pressurized system, so it'll have 1 atmosphere of pressure. That means that we can't launch with the ISS or with SpaceX. We'll have to explore launch providers that are more lenient on their expectations. Size is another big constraint for us, so we have a 4U payload right now and a 6U CubeSat. It doesn't leave much room for margin or for errors. So that's driving kind of a lot of our other decisions at this point in time. Nutrient profile of the plant. So as of right now, we've selected alfalfa. That alfalfa provides type of nutrients that would help support and sustain the astronauts. So you can't just pick any plant. You have to maintain within a certain parameter of conditions. On power is a big driving force, keeping the plants alive throughout this. Once we start, they have to stay within that swing of temperature that we'll list later. So power is a big driving force to your question.
How much time between handover and actual deployment can your plant survive?
Well, they're not, they're in, they're seeds.
In
so-
seeds, months of
So so you basically can sit on the ground
Yes.
for like 2-3 months and
No
so you get
problems.
deployed, no problem.
Correct.
Yeah.
Do you then have any restrictions for while you're sitting on the ground, humidity, temperature of just surrounding, or is this hermetically sealed system that?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess, are you concerned of having to go up to a 12U or?
We are, and that's one of our
Future consideration.
considerations, and we most likely will go up to a 12U. This current design is for a 6U, and we'll be weighing the pros and cons of both.
I guess what's the biggest concern to go to?
Volume.
Yeah.
Volume and thermal isolation.
I mean, size up if you need, like,
Yeah, we almost, like, we had this 90% design for this proposal. We realized, we learned some things. We will almost certainly be going up to a 12U in the future, but we're gonna, another option is reducing the payload, if possible. So we may be able to make it work, and we'll weigh all those pros and cons at the end.
I guess I don't see a concern of sizing up, like,
Shouldn't be concerned.
Yeah. It would have a ton of benefits, and we almost certainly will go with that.
Yeah.
Right, so for requirements, those ECS conditions, I know you guys are waiting.
I missed it. What other launch vehicle restrictions were you talking about?
We have pressure, and most systems don't send up something that's pressurized.
We're just
So,
our requirements and technology readiness levels. So getting the go ahead to get on like a SpaceX rocket or a mission with the ISS would be a lot more strict.
I mean, not only are we pressurized, we're gonna be containing water within that pressurized system, so anything leaks and damaging other types of systems that might be on that launch vehicle, so we're gonna have a lot to prove that our system is safe and can be launched.
It's actually easier to prove your pressurized system can go on a SpaceX rocket than it is on the ISS.
Okay.
The requirements are, the testing is pretty much just stick it in the water, your pressure systems, air bubble. It's actually a lot easier.
Yeah, we were told to maybe look at like Firefly or something.
Well, yeah, you should never design in one particular launch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we were told that we were gonna need to look at other launch vehicles.
we can't
especially-
pick whatever we want.
No, you
I do want to give you kudos for already thinking about that, because that also leads me to think that you're going to do a lot of ground testing.
Yes. we have
Yeah,
a
which
lot
is
of-
good.
Is there a history of pressure vessels on CubeSats? Just out of curiosity. There is?
want a lot of.
A history of planes.
So what are you doing to light and everything? Is there a window on it or you have?
We'll get
inside?
into that in the
Okay.
design of the
It's
ECS.
a whiteboard, but yes, as you said,
Okay.
we have a payload design in a few slides that will to go over all the sensors.
Yeah, we can get through the
There's no
driver.
glass that can easily break. That's where I was getting at.
All right, so to keep going forward, we'll talk about those conditions on the next slide. I know you guys are waiting for that. Another requirement for us is battery levels. So because once we start, we can't stop, we need to reduce that safety or reduce the risk by increasing our factor of safety. A larger battery supports in case something fails or goes wrong, and having redundancy throughout the entire system. So again, we're dealing with life, right? So one sensor isn't enough. Finding multiple variations of how to have 2 or 3 layers of redundancy is really important for us. For the technical drivers, a water delivery system that can compensate for microgravity is a challenge, and we have a proposed solution. For sensor selection, we need a specific amount of resolution on those sensors so that, because they're going to be the ones driving the system. You know, we're not, we can send commands, but it does need to autonomously regulate. So on top of that, we have our scintillation detectors for measuring radiation. We can't just pick any radiation sensor. We want to measure specific types and amounts. Thermal strategy would be a big concern for us as well. We want the plants to stay warm but not cook. We want them to not freeze. So really, it's going to drive a lot of our other decisions in the future. And then we have a low technology readiness level of our payload. So it hasn't been done in this manner before. I don't have much to go off of, or we don't have much to go off of. So to address the low TRL, we have to really think about safety even more than we usually would.
I mean, the Air Force Academy has proposed a series.
Sir,
Yeah, the last basics one was really good. I'll get you the contact. So maybe there's some collaboration that can kind of happen there, because they were looking to grow tomatoes. I don't know why alfalfa tomatoes. Yes.
Our reason for alfalfa is size restrictions.
Oh, yeah, and I figured I can't remember how long the tomatoes took to grow. I think they were
Yeah.
but at least they were looking at similar problems of how to build an autonomous system.
Yeah, we've also been in contact with veggie and plant. They do tomatoes there particularly.
We at least have an Air Force contact.
Awesome.
and it looks
More
like,
context for that.
yeah, it looks like USAFA is gonna launch, I don't know.
Yeah, but they proposed a series of ones, and it's a professor.
US Air Force again.
US Air Force.
And the key data products out for us, obviously the sensor data to monitor how the plants have responded to their environment, the images, as well as the radiation.
Any place you don't want to go orbit wise?
We have, I don't think, any restrictions.
So our initial test is going to be in low Earth orbit, but to test extremes, like places like the moon or other places outside of the protection of Earth, would be great looking points moving forward, because you want that harsh environment. Because if you're going there and you're making the food, you want the testing done there. So we're doing the early testing here before we move onwards.
Right now, most of the only real testing on plants is being done on the ISS. Its orbit is pretty much locked in, so if we want to test in these higher orbits or around the moon, our goal is that this system would be a platform to test in different orbits, different environments, and give people the ability to experiment or test different plants without having to get the regulation to get onto the ISS, so that private industries.
How big is this pressure vessel? Is it one?
About 4U.
About 4U. In regards to our TRL, this will be our third rendition of the ECS. The past 2 years, we've made 2 of these now. So we have, some testing and familiarity with the logistics of creating.
All right. So I guess this goes a little bit to your question, and maybe you're going to answer it later, but I'll ask it again. Are you going to vary any of your either technical drivers or mission constraints, or the technical driver? You're going to vary water. You're going to vary radiation. Okay.
Not radiation.
Okay.
The 3 main things we'll control will be, we just click to the next slide, you'll see it right.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
All right, so the main things we want to control are temperature, soil moisture, light intensity, and light duration. So the optimal target, I'll start with temperature, is between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius. However, the plants will stay alive and will still grow in the range of 15 to 40 degrees Celsius. As long as they're prevented from going outside of those ranges, they'll still stay alive. And we've designed modes to accommodate for that. It is actively being controlled. And then for soil moisture, it does change throughout the course of the mission. So Upon initial saturation, we saturate to a certain soil moisture percentage, and then that'll cause the seeds to germinate. They want a lot of moisture. And then after that, we start to maintain just what they need to facilitate growth. A key thing to think of is we don't have any great ways to pull water out once we've saturated it. So it'll be much more difficult to handle that. So we really want to be on the lower end of the amount of water that we release to make sure that we're on the lower end of that threshold. So latency, this is a typo. We have 27,000 lux is our target, not 1,000. That was given to us by our biology department who are calculating the research on alfalfa in specific. Same thing for duration, another typo. So it's 66% to model the typical cycle to encounter on Earth, 16 hours a day, daylight, and 8 hours without. Sorry.
Yeah, I want you to finish first, but. go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I was gonna wait till you finished as
Thanks.
well.
In a roll.
All right, so those are the four we're controlling. Now, we are monitoring humidity as well, and it does need to be controlled, but it's in a passive manner as of right now. This is, the solution we have involves desiccant lining along the walls. However, the current calculations show that it is infeasible to handle the amount of water and humidity we'll have to deal with. So we are exploring a solution on this. Maybe once we talk to some of those contexts, we can learn some more information. CO2, our proposal. The plants require at least 400 ppm, but our idea, instead of having an additional pressurized canister of CO2, which would really raise the complexity of the mission, we're just going to put a lot of CO2 in at the start. That should be more than enough for the 30-day duration because we're not trying to keep the plants alive for 2 years. That's an easy workaround for us to achieve target goal. Excess CO2 is actually good for plants. They've been shown in veggie and advanced plant habitat to be unaffected by very high levels of CO2. And for pressure, we're monitoring it basically just to say that our system is still pressurized. We're not controlling it. For questions.
Oh, no, I saw that my question would be better suited later, so.
Yeah, so for your temperature there, this is when the experiment starts, or is this like after you do handover? Because you may not have temperature control after you hand over.
After germination.
Yep.
Yes.
Beginning of germination.
Yes, at seeds, it's less relevant, but this is once the experiment is occurring and the ECS is actively being controlled. That's the range it needs to be. So once you have leaves out and roots growing, it's a lot easier to damage the plant. But yes, before handoff and launch and all that, when it's just a seed, it's not as crucial.
You'll have this on your soil moisture. How are you controlling it if you don't have a requirement?
We're monitoring exactly how much water we put into the system. We'll have moisture detectors within the seed pillows, and we're gonna just not reach maximum saturation for the media that's in there.
By variable, I meant that the target will change. So on initial, there is still a target, just means in the beginning, it's one target and it changes throughout the course of the mission based on the phase of development that the plant's going through. So there is still a target.
They need more water at the beginning.
So maybe best, I know you're just this one chart, but maybe best to break that out when you actually get for them. Yeah, I got a couple other questions, but I'll let.
So depending on what you deploy from, you may be sitting on orbit powered off for an extended period of time, which means the spacecraft will reach negative temperature.
Yep.
Your water will freeze, your water will expand.
Yes.
Correct.
Have you done any testing or do you plan any testing on your pressure vessel for that large internal force of that water expanding?
Yes, so our water is actually going to be in a water bladder and not fully take up all the space
Okay.
that it's in, so that it has room to expand. And ground testing will be done as well. At FAU, we have our freezers, which can get negative temperatures, which we have tested in the past.
Okay.
And the seeds are stored in a freezer, so.
Got it.
That was one of my questions. Other one is on the light intensity and duration. You guys have a lamp that you're carrying on this space?
Yes.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, we have full spectral LEDs for what the leaves need, much like Veggie uses on their platforms at Kennedy Space Center. We also have a few methods of verifying that it's functioning. So one, the readout of how much power it's using. We have photoresistors separate to measure those values, make sure we're hitting that target, as well as just the cameras. You can just check to see that things are on. So we have multiple ways of making sure that the LEDs are functioning for the time period they should be, as well as backups.
I was gonna say, and in some of our previous experiments in the years past, FAU has constructed their own custom LED light boards for growing those plants.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So. What's the question? So your controlled things are requirements. You can't move outside of that.
Yeah.
Are there what are the variables to explore um, plant growth or no? Or do you have any variables? Or is this just, or are the last four really your variables? Are you controlling any of those variables? Controlling the variation of those
We're
variables?
passively controlling humidity at this
Okay,
stage.
got it, okay.
As far as CO2, we're controlling it in the sense that we are gonna start out at a known rate, at a known parts per million, and let the plants, let it reduce over time. So we're gonna make sure that we start at a high enough level that we're still above our minimum at the end of our experiment.
So where I'm going with this is, at the end of this, you write a paper, and I'd like it would be better if it didn't just say, we grew the plant, right? Because then you don't know, most papers are about exploring the trade space.
Yeah.
Why?
So
But you have one vessel, so I can't,
We only have one
Right.
vessel and there's not a lot
yeah,
of
and you only have one
previous-
vessel, so that's kind of hard,
Well,
okay.
there's one way, and it comes in our future considerations at the end. You can test chlorophyll through a hyperspectral camera. So the hyperspectral would give us the ability to test the actual health of that plant, not just growing or not, and provide us a deeper level of health.
So we're bringing in the gas.
Like,
Oh, and then there's other metric that needs to be dealt with.
ethylene gas,
Ethylene gas.
measures the stress on the plant.
This will be another sensor that we'll have to have and monitor. Currently, Veggie uses scrubbers, which would be a lot more complexity for us to add in. We're currently exploring that as well.
I'll explain, plants produce ethylene when they're in a higher stressed state. The more ethylene, the more stress.
And if
Okay,
there's
so-
too much, they die.
Then let me try and go to the ground-based side of it. How many different controlled plant growth situations on the ground are you gonna do? Just one?
We would be doing multiple.
That number could be variable, but yes, the idea would be have
Okay.
an exact copy on the ground.
Okay. All right, I understand, okay. And I realize you're restricted in size, so you can't vary much by variance.
to go back, how are you measuring the chlorophyll you said? You said it's done through the camera,
It's not in our current proposal, so don't get too far into that right now. It's for our future considerations.
Using a hyperspectral.
But yes, with the hyperspectral, I just don't want you to think we're doing it right now. But yeah, hyperspectral can tell chlorophyll. Chlorophyll's a measure of plant health.
Sorry, okay, I'm not a biologist, like, I don't know. So like, chlorophyll measures the health how?
The chlorophyll is what makes the plant green. If the plant is yellow and wilty and dying, it's not healthy. When it's dark green and vibrant, you know that it's healthy. So there's a
Hyperspectral
way
can
of,
see that.
yeah, hyperspectral can actually see into that, really measure the amount of chlorophyll in the leaves.
Presumably the chlorophyll is also related to the CO2.
It is.
Okay.
CO2 is needed to create the photosynthesis.
Joseph, did you have?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious. So your pressure vessel is 101.
Yeah.
And then CO2, that's 400 parts per million. So, can you like inside your 4U volume, like pressure vessel, what is the composition of gas that you're putting in there? So it's like 400 parts per million look like in a 4U kind of formula.
5% CO2,
Yeah, so we're gonna have much closer to like 8,000 parts per million.
like 5%.
of CO2, which is like closer to 5%.
You can have a slightly lower oxygen level than standard because the plants will be producing oxygen as they grow. Like, we can't have no oxygen, obviously, but
Is it going to start like 10%? Like CO2 in there?
It'd probably still mostly be nitrogen as the normal atmospheric composition, but the ratio would be around 5% CO2, which is around 8,000 parts per million, and oxygen's around 26% normally. But that can also be increased, but we're not looking at an increase.
these are definitely things that we can test on the ground before
Yeah.
launch.
How do you know how much CO2 to put in? I mean, has that been like modeled
Yeah.
as CO2 consumption every time?
Even when we went to Kennedy Space Center earlier, inside those giant freezers, they test them at like 10,000 parts per million, and when talking with them privately, they said that they were completely fine at 8,000.
It's not that I'm worried about the in excess of CO2. It's like, how do you know like what the minimum amount of CO2, the minimum volume?
Our biology department recommended 400, as well as you can research it fairly easy online.
From that, they can't really do their photosynthesis.
You're putting enough in to maintain that at least 400 parts.
Yeah,
Over 30 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is that where you guys got the 8,000 parts per million for that for you?
Yes, and especially since they're microgreens, they're not full-fledged leaves, so the ability to take out and scrub CO2 isn't as good as like a full-grown plant would be able to do.
Kind of doing overkill with the CO2 at that level, but better safe. than
There's no reason not to.
Are you also measuring oxygen?
Yes.
Yes.
Standard.
Okay, so you could actually figure out how much photosynthesis.
And that could be another way to regulate plant health. Let's say your camera turns off and everything else, you can see is water level decreasing, is it soaking up water? Is the ratio between oxygen and CO2 still changing? So
You can also affect how much oxygen the plants produce by changing the amount of light given to them. They produce oxygen during their light phase. They actually produce carbon dioxide in the dark phase. Really?
Yeah.
They do. Yeah, I didn't know that either.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
But not as much.
I just wanted to say that we've been throwing you guys a lot of questions and you guys are doing,
Sorry.
you guys are killing it, literally. Like, this is a hard, like, this is like my brain hurts because it's so complex and like everything is like high priority because it's life, right?
Yeah.
So
life or death here.
yeah.
Every one of those lines is like that.
Yeah, so if you get to this later in the presentation, I'm willing to wait. But my question is like, there seems to be, you know, oh, we start the experiment, like all things, like we're doing it now. Whereas like when it's a seed, it's chill, like on the launch vehicle, it's chill, when we're commissioning, it's chill. I'm curious of at what, like, when do you know when to start the experiment?
So
Like,
once
what are the
we've launched,
next
we've
one?
detumbled and everything, we're gonna heat up, get to an ideal temperature and then.
So the entrance is like
yes.
not tumbling,
Correct.
certain temperature,
In very
Certain
specific
diet
moments,
range.
we have
commission.
listed as a key action that is a hard
We have a
change.
series of requests. And we start.
I think there's like a checklist of.
Yes, absolutely.
Christine?
I know you mentioned redundancy. Are we gonna see a flow chart of your redundancy later on? Like in your ConOps
I
or
don't believe it's in a flowchart form, but we do show the redundancy in our payload design. So,
you're gonna walk us through it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was all.
All right, let's try the next.
all right, so we're gonna give a brief experiment overview. We're also gonna dive very deep into this over the next few slides. So our experiment focuses on growing alfalfa plants in a controlled microgravity and elevated radiation conditioned environment. Our ECS will simulate Earth-like conditions to support germination and while maintaining growing parameters. So over here on the left, we have some tasks. So obviously we're going to be simulating Earth-like conditions while controlling things like temperature, water, and light cycles, as well as on top of just monitoring the CO2, pressure, radiation, and humidity as we discussed before. Now, key actions are some very important moments along our experiment. So our initial heating to 15 degrees Celsius is going to occur during our system check. You'll see that in our flow chart in the next few slides. Our biggest moment for us is that initial water saturation you mentioned. So once you reach that 15 degrees Celsius and you say everything is nominal and you're ready to go, you saturate with 75 milliliters of water over a 12-hour period, and that will start the germination process. And once we see germination, that's a big milestone for us because it shows proof of concept that it can germinate in space. But some outcomes we can expect, obviously, are data generation. So the produced data on plant growth and the environmental conditions we're able to maintain. Our radiation analysis. So we're going to be doing a test to see the effectiveness of our environmentally controlled system walls. So the aluminum it's made out of and the borated polyethylene that is made of. I will go into detail on why we chose this material and how it actually reduces radiation in a few slides. And this all gives us insight for future missions. So it'll inform us about future efforts to deploy sustainable agricultural systems for long-term space missions and the potential or like the how robust our system is. Is it only going to last that 30 days? But we can continue that test for until end of life of the satellite to prove that our systems do work and our redundancy is effective. Next slide, please. Yeah.
Do you have a way to ensure that that 75 milliliters of water?
We do.
Yes.
In our payload design, which we'll be showing, we have a manifold to evenly disperse water and also double check the amount that is delivered.
You land on aluminum for your radiation seal.
So in a few slides, we will talk about why we picked aluminum specifically. That's what we've been making it out recently, but you want a material that can effectively reduce gamma radiation without being too heavy for reentry. Using something like steel could be more questionable, but that's what we've been making it out of. But yes, I will go into more detail about that specifically, as well as the thicknesses.
If there's other things you could possibly think about, like you can maybe get like, I know there's some tricks that people use about using like epoxy and like putting like some kind of material, metal shavings in it, like some lead.
Okay.
That actually can help reduce it too as well, but we can talk about that.
I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah.
Did you have sensors in water? Yes, it's warmed up. All the same temperature. But you know, it's in the water bladder.
We don't have sensors in the water bladder as far as right now, but that's definitely a good
You
consideration
should
to
put
add.
a thermistor in the water bladder specifically, yes,
Yeah.
you're right.
So, you've heard us say it many times, this is our ECS. This is the main payload within our system. This is gonna comprise approximately 4U of space within our currently 6U CubeSat, so this is our most important component. As Sky mentioned, this would be our exterior of a aluminum body surrounded by our, what was that, orated polyethylene insulations. Now, the most important component within this is obviously our 2 seat pillows. These are primarily based on the designs used on the ISS for the veggie and advanced plant habitat. And they comprise they comprise a Kevlar exterior filled with a calcined clay. They will also contain 25 seeds each. That's our current measurement, but that is to be determined. Based on that amount of seeds and the amount of time to be grown, we have our water bladder size. This is our next most important component of the system is our water delivery. As we said, this is a flexible water bladder, so that as we draw water from it, it can collapse and we will have positive feed throughout. Water will be transferred using 2 different peristaltic pumps for redundancy. We can actually put a stepper motor in that peristaltic pump so that we can have 1 level of measurement of how much water we anticipate going through it. We can also add flow sensors off of that, as well as the moisture gauges that will be contained within the seed pillows themselves. So we have 3 levels of measuring how much water is being delivered currently.
Okay, so kind of, I got a couple questions here.
Okay,
For the ECS itself, like this the structure,
yes,
you plan on having that like rad hardened, right? 'Cause
Yes.
like,
yes.
so there's gonna be like no, I guess, trying to think of like if, so the light board, the fans, right? That's gonna need power.
Yes, we're gonna have a bulkhead where power is brought in and data brought back out. We're gonna try to consolidate all of our penetrations to one point.
Kind of like its own connector.
Yeah,
Be like
Okay.
a umbilical cord almost, so that we don't.
So
have
to from the outside of the ECS.
yeah, and that'll probably be brought in through the lid on the top. The main body of it will be constructed out of one solid piece of aluminum to try to reduce the amount of penetrations and welds. And only on the top will we have it sealed down with gaskets.
Got it. Okay. Right. Yeah, that pretty much answers my question.
So for your part of your chamber that contains the water, how full is the bladder? Like, of remaining space in it, what percentage would you give as remaining?
We're gonna have to do that through experimentation, but we plan on letting the bladder fully expand when frozen,
Okay,
so that it can be completely
So-
frozen and then reduce as it thaws.
my reason I'm asking this is if it's not 100% full, which it can't be because it has to expand. I'm slightly worried about your vibration test, where it's going to shake around very, very aggressively inside the launch, as well as potential changing of moments of inertia, but you're 6U, so that should not affect the launch vehicle. But it is something that you are going to need a waiver for, because you are gonna move around. I believe, Norman can correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you'll be in the noise with launch vehicle.
Yeah.
Also, we're containing the water bladder within the ECS so that it's part of the same temperature and pressure controlled environment, as opposed to having like an exterior pressurized water coming into it.
Yeah.
Again, reducing the number of penetrations into the ECS.
Biggest water gets used like this, right?
Huh?
Water bars like this big, right?
Yeah. It's gonna be about roughly the size of a water bottle if when filled. What did we say, maybe 350 milliliters?
We get propulsion slosh that's
Yeah,
in
that's
and out
true.
between the fins.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can you repeat your concern about the live environment though? I missed that.
I was just concerned with the bladder in there and moving around.
Want a solid state.
Well, either in a solid state or a liquid, because now you're going to be
It'll
able
be liquid on launch.
So-
To the ECS or to the launch vehicle?
to both. So primarily ECS of your bladder of it is going to be moving around, and now essentially you're gonna have friction of two surfaces rubbing on against each other, and your bladder is the one that's going to wear.
Yeah.
So is there a concern there?
And now the material we make that flexible water bladder out of could change. I know in my senior design project, I did something similar and we used a 40 mil PVC liner for it. And that's the same material they use to make the lining on the shower pans plumb. It's meant to handle construction level, debris within it.
I do see your concern, maybe like a lubricant in between so that friction
Yeah.
is mitigated might be a good idea to look towards. One of the things with the water bladder is that it's a temperature regulator as well. It's a large thermal mass in our system.
Yeah.
Water especially being good at that, so we're using that to our advantage here as well.
We have a Capcom heater located here between the grow chamber and the water, so that as it heats up, we're directly heating up both the water and the plant area. On the back side and not shown, but on this side is where our desiccant lining will be. And that's probably the biggest thing that needs to be studied on the ground, is just how much desiccant we're gonna need.
Sorry if I missed this, or if this is just a completely ignorant question, but right now you have this, like, right? Does orientation matter to you? Like, if it's upside down, will it?
No, and actually I was gonna get into that when I described the position of the light board.
I
It's
see,
not at the top of the chamber, it's at the opposite end of the seats.
I see, okay.
Because without the presence of gravity, seeds have two ways of plants have two ways of orienting their growth. One is through gravity, one is through light. So having the light at the opposite end from the seeds is gonna promote plant growth in that direction. I also wanted to say that the reason that we were choosing the peristaltic pumps is they do very well in space environments. They don't get primed. And because the motor is isolated from the water itself, there's no risk of contamination from the motor.
But when you're doing ground testing, you will test with different orientations
Oh,
with
yes.
your system, okay.
Desiccant, I think?
Desiccant is like, you know, those silicone packets you get in clothing? and-
Those terrifying.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
So do you guys, that honestly terrifies me, to have that in space environment. You guys get hit with a micrometeoroid or something like that, that just spews out for debris in orbit, right?
if we get by a micrometeoroid.
Say it again?
I'm asking if we get hit by what?
If you get hit by like a micrometeoroid or some other impact of space, of orbital debris in space or something like that, that desiccant is just gonna leak all those pearls out into space and cause more problems.
Well,
I don't believe they need to be pearls either.
we're looking at desiccant sheets, actually.
Alright.
That's just for convenience of shipping.
Yeah, no, their desiccant sheets are the ones that we're looking at, and the layout and thickness of those are gonna need to be determined.
Alright, thank you. I was having a heart attack watching that.
Also, if we get hit
Fair, I
by,
didn't think of it.
also if we get hit by micrometeoroid. and
You have other problems, you have other problems, I
Yeah,
agree.
all kinds, that water's, yeah, so. But your point about the vibrating of the water, we may increase the thickness of this, this one interior wall to help give some more support to
Yeah.
that. That'll be something we'll need to consider. That was a great point, thank you. Also then coming from here, going into the two seat pillows, the water will be delivered, as Sky said, through a series of manifolds, so that there's an even pressure distribution within the seat pillow itself.
I mean, and then I have one more point.
Yeah, is all of this stuff like okay or like kosher for like outgassing? Like, have you explored desiccant in?
This is gonna be within the pressurized system, so as far as outgassing is gonna be concerned,
Oh.
it's gonna be our seal. Not releasing our ECS leaking out.
Crazy.
And all of this would be within
outgas
1
and
ounce.
evaporate completely, but since it's in the system, there, nothing internally should change. There should be no difference.
Yeah,
If it seals
Wow.
properly.
as long as our seal is good, that's a huge component.
Well, tack onto that, what if some of the outgassing material, if there is some, this is on your camera, like in your.
There should be outgas within the chamber
Is it the
theoretically,
black
but
Because they're at
to answer
1
that
ATM.
question, we're really more concerned with humidity buildup. And the location of our 2 fans are placed specifically so that we can get an airflow across the lens of the fan and get an airflow across the base of the plants. And the reason we really need airflow across the plants is as the plants produce oxygen, that oxygen can collect on the leaves themselves and can suffocate the plant. So by maintaining a certain amount of airflow, we can make sure that that oxygen doesn't bubble up basically on the leaves themselves.
On top of that, an alternative solution, the ones that Advanced Plant Habitat uses are like a cold plate with some material connected to the cold plate to draw out the humidity and then put it into a certain area. That's another trade that we'll have to look into in the future.
Yeah, we're not exactly married to desiccant lining at this point. We really want to explore other options, but this is the one that we could find the most information on currently.
Yes.
I just want to go back to your fans, but you can.
Yeah, so your systems, you're obviously gonna want to test them before
Yes.
launch. Actually, I've answered my own question. You're already gonna have your water lines cleared so they will not freeze and break.
Yeah, water lines will be clear,
Because you're
clear,
gonna-
open and with air.
You can't get the seat pillows wet. Okay, answer my own question.
In regards to the fans, because microgravity is in this environment, there is no convection. So there is no denser material rising. So the fan is giving that sort of airflow. That is its purpose and why we have to overcome microgravity. This seems to be the biggest problem with studying on the ISS.
Not shown very well in this is there'll be a louvered slats right here or slats right here. So that airflow will come through this way and this way. So we get a convection in 2 different
I just
rotations.
want to make sure
throughout
your
the
fan had something to actually push into the chamber.
Understood.
Yes.
Make sure that it was pulling.
Yes, yeah, it's gonna pull from this location into this section of the design and then blow out here, and recirculate back.
That was my question.
Yes. And then as you can see, we have a series of different sensors between our pressure, CO2 temperature, humidity. Also in this chamber is going to be our scintillation detector. We'll have one scintillation detector within the ECS and then another one outside of the ECS so we can make comparisons.
Orange there, the outer orange, that's your aluminum shielding that you're talking about.
This is our aluminum and then this is our insulation, our borated polyethylene.
Are you gonna have your fans like constantly?
No.
How, I guess what?
There's timings on that based on what we've learned from the biology department, like as far as the initial germination, while the seeds are still within the seed pillows, there's really almost no need to have the fans on yet.
It's more for fully grown and developed leaves.
Yes.
It's the biggest concern on larger grown things like lettuce on the ISS. This is a backup as well.
Okay, I see.
It's not as critical as any of the other components.
Also, point out, we have our 2 cams in different locations so that we can get different angles so that we can properly measure plant growth in either orientation. We may also, as we've mentioned, possibly put in a hyperspectral camera instead of the cameras that just the regular RGB.
You mentioned polyethylene being used as your insulation.
Borated polyethylene.
Is there an off-gassing concern? Because standard polyethylene off-gas is like crazy. And off-gassing in space is generally not advised.
Yeah. Sky.
Yeah, haven't looked entirely into its off-gassing material. The main purpose is just finding a low Z material with a lot of hydrogen in it. So we could switch out materials if off-gassing is a concern, as long as it's high in hydrogen and a light material, like that seal.
There's reasons for that.
Yes.
Okay, we're 10 slides into a 32 slide deck and almost an hour in.
Okay, and then obviously our whiteboard,
Yeah.
so we can go on to
Yeah.
the next slide.
This was the big part of it.
You can keep pushing us.
Okay, so I said our most important component within that ECS is our seed pillow. So this is our representation of the seed pillow and what's happening throughout its phases. As I said, the seed pillow is modeled after what's being done on the ISS with veggie and advanced plant habitat. The exterior of that is a Kevlar lining It's fire retardant and handles friction and wear during those vibration periods. It will be filled with a calcined clay. Calcined clay is ideal for this type of situation. It has a high moisture absorption rate, but it also has a very, very rough surface on the particles themselves. And that rough surface can trap oxygen molecules to it. Because plant roots need both water and oxygen. You'll drown them if they don't get a little bit of air. The seeds will actually be held in place with a water-soluble polymer. Go ahead.
You mentioned fire retardant. Are you concerned about a fire?
No, but
Okay.
it's just one of the factoids I have read studying up on it.
Got it.
No, we definitely don't want fire. The water-soluble polymer that holds the seeds in place, think those breath saver strips, those little dissolving semi-plastic strips. That's pretty much the same thing. Those will not only hold the seeds in place during launch, but it'll also give the plant a path of growth to orient itself out of the calcined clay when we actually get into the growth phase. After we get to our experiment phase and we start to saturate the calcined clay with the 75 milliliters of water, that is when we begin phase 1 for germination. That phase consists of everything from seed up until the shoot of the plant penetrates the seed pillow. That should take roughly a week. After that, as the plant continues to develop and we get into phase 2 is everything from that seed shoot to what is considered a sprout. A sprout is when the first 2 initial leaves that were contained within the seed fully deploy, fully become exposed. That is when you get your sprout. Now we're going to continue this experiment, hopefully past the microgreen stage. Now microgreen stage is everything past sprout leaves up to the point where the first adult leaf starts to form.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna wait till you. finish
Okay.
your-
The reason for this, why this is such an important phase in plant development is from a seedling, a plant is given all the nutrients it needs to get to this phase and has very high nutrients. But an adult plant has a different set of nutrient values. The microgreen is like the Goldilocks zone between those two, where you have 200 or 300 times the amount of nutritional value that you would have from either of the others.
I really like this chart. I guess I was just wondering where in this phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 is your minimum success?
So minimum is 7 days, so that would be encapsulated in phase
And it's
1.
also controlling the ECS,
Yeah, it's
even
not
at the
about
plant
the plant.
side.
So,
This is to define the plant stages, so that when we move into describing phase 1 through 3, you have reference on what we mean and how we know how to promote into these other modes.
And while we have days listed in our chart as far as this is when we reach this phase, this is when we reach this phase, those are approximations.
right.
The true definition is by the development of the plant to each of these stages.
Yeah, I was just about to ask that. You have days, like 7 to 10 days listed.
Yeah,
So I was like,
how do we know whether it's 7 or it was 10? It's
Yeah.
when it reaches each of these milestones in growth.
This is specific to alpha.
So I guess,
No, this is specific to how all plants grow. This is, yeah, that's sprout, that's microgreen. Just for reference sake, when the two sprout leaves fall off and you're left with just these leaves, that's what you get, baby greens.
But you were referring to the time frame though, for 7 days, you get this. and then
Yes.
you get that, that's specific to alfalfa, correct?
Yes.
Yes,
All right,
yes.
got you.
I think that is. Yeah.
Sorry.
John, did you have a question?
yeah, I imagine this is the case based on the way that you've talked about your success criteria, but is there any concern that if growth goes more slowly for whatever reason, that you won't get the information that you need by 7 days? Or is it just completely agnostic of whatever's happening with the plants?
Pretty much agnostic.
Yeah.
So we talked about camera resolution. We'll just go past this quickly. We just wanted to confirm that if we have a germination, we can see it with enough resolution. So if our camera is 10 centimeters away in our ECS, which it is, and it has this field of view, this pixel count, this is the worst amongst the field of views versus vertical and horizontal. We work it out to be able to see 0.05 millimeters per pixel, which is more than enough resolution to see about a 1 millimeter sprout popping out of the slide next, please. So we want to talk about radiation a little bit because ionizing radiation is cosmic radiation for the most part. And when plants get hit with this, it can damage DNA, cause mutations, and cell death. So on the left side, we have the outside of our environmentally controlled system and the inside over here. So we have four main types of radiation, like alpha, beta, neutron, and gamma. We're only really concerned with neutron and gamma because alpha and beta have a hard time penetrating even just air or a cell wall of a plant, let alone our aluminum walls. So for gamma radiation, we have our aluminum walls to mitigate the amount of gamma radiation. This thickness can vary, but right now we have it about 1 centimeter thick. And for neutron, we have a low Z or low density material oriented polyethylene. What this does is when it hits a hydrogen molecule, it produces less secondary particles or radiation. If it hits something like lead or a heavier material, you get a lot more byproducts from that initial strike. So we use something light and less dense so that the amount of gamma radiation is a lot less than what you'd see, and it can be absorbed into the aluminum. The exact thickness of this can vary, but the more the merrier. Right now we're at about 0.5 centimeter, but if we were to promote to like a 12U size, we could greatly expand that insulation for radiation.
Titanium at all?
We haven't considered titanium, but I do need to look into more materials and their radiation resistance. Next thing. Right, so now we're going to step into our ConOps. So this is a general mission life, and then we're going to dive more into detail and things like our system check and experiment a little bit. So we start with a pre-phase, which I will define on in the next slide. And then we have our launch and our system check, which is pretty standard. Then going into our phase 1 through 3, which we talked about with the plant growth, or 1 through 4 rather, and then our deorbit. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about 1 through 4 as well as our pre-phase. So in our pre-phase, this is on the ground. So this is when we're putting our seeds into our seed pillows, securing everything. We're then going to fill our water bladder with the appropriate amount of water, saturate the CO2 or the ESC atmosphere with CO2, and then seal the ECS. And that's when it can go into our satellite and then into the deployer. Phase 1 is after launch and detumble. It's about a 3 to 7 day milestone or duration. And a big key part here is that initial water saturation occurs in phase 1 in this germination stage. We will promote to phase 2 once we see that germination and we start to enter the sprout stage. It'll last 7 to 10 days and will continue to support the development of the plants. Once we see the adult leaf forming, we'll know in our microgreen stage, which will be around 7 to 10 days, we'll support that microgreen as well. We do have some common actions up here I meant to get to first. So through all these phases, we are maintaining our ECS parameters, cycling our LEDs, and taking our images with our cameras. Notice from any one of these phases 1 through 3, we can go into phase 4. The plant should die, we would enter it early, or at the end of our mission, and we have got to the microgreen stage, we will continue into phase 4. And this will go into the end of life of our satellite. We will continue our normal ECS operations, supporting plant growth until our water runs out, and then continue to test and monitor the ECS to gather long-term operational data for design improvements down the road, maybe on the next generation. We also continue to report radiation data with our internal and external scintillation detectors. Any questions?
Yeah. Do you have a slide, or do you talk more about like the line between pre-phase to phase 1?
Yes, this line was a bit of an oversight because there's a lot that goes on in between there, but yes, we do get into what that all means.
So all the promotion between all these phases relies on your camera, and if for some reason that dies, is there any way to promote through phases, assuming the rest of your sensor suite is up?
Some of our gas sensors can detect the presence of plant growth, especially if we put in that ethylene detector. And that's why we have multiple cameras and why we've also thought about putting a different type of cameras.
Yeah, and these are more arbitrary than anything because these show you what stage you've gotten into. For the most part, they are simple.
Yeah. Okay. Then after the initial germination, phase 2, 3, and 4 kind of have some very similar. The conditions don't change very much. There's not much for us to actually alter. It's just getting that initial germination down right. That's then monitoring the water level. That's really the only thing we have to change.
To get definition purpose.
If the plants aren't growing, then there's going to be no water absorption, and we're going to see moisture level in like.
So this is our system check. So obviously, once we deploy, we're gonna have a wait period and a checkout, and then we plan to detumble, and from that, we're gonna deploy our solar panels at some point. From there, we're gonna start charging our battery to at least about 95%. However, we do expect our battery to be fully charged on launch. However, if it's not, we will charge here. Once we hit that threshold, we're gonna start heating our ECS with a heating element. This will bring the temperature up from wherever it is, up to 17 degrees Celsius. This can take any amount of time. There is no time constraint on this. And once we reach that 15 degrees Celsius, we will wait for ground command in order to enter phase 1, because that is a critical point where we do that initial water saturation. We want to make sure everything checks out on our end. So that is a self-promote.
So this was the slide between pre and.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is that system check block that was in between.
Okay, what is your plan for detumble? Like, are you doing like reaction wheels or just magnet torquers? Like, does the time matter?
Reaction shields, yes.
Okay. And then when you say wait, sorry, what was that?
Just the initial, traditional 15
Oh.
minute wait period.
After
Okay.
launch,
Yeah,
after
before.
separation from the.
Detumble and checkout, or like, I guess why was checkout first? When you say checkout, does that mean like
Maybe we make,
first acquisition?
to me,
like-
checkout is like quality of health of subsystem, so like, hey, we're on, basically,
Can you talk into tumble?
probably not part of systems.
Okay.
So you have no, unless your power is that bad, which we'll get to later. Is there a reason you need active control? Can you go to a UHF system that you can be in a tumble, which would greatly reduce the cost of your spacecraft? Because you just don't need ADC now.
So we have deployable solar panels because the amount of power needed is so extensive that if we only use 1/6 of our phases, it wouldn't be sufficient to sustain.
Can the plant still like grow in a tumble?
They wouldn't be growing at that point, but yes, they can grow.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. But the main thing is the temperature
Yes.
and making sure that like everything's okay.
Is there a heating element in your spacecraft? I know you showed in that chart.
It was in between the plant growth chamber and the water bladder.
It's actually a
Along
film,
the wall
Oh.
between.
Kapton film heater. That's along this wall, it's actually very thin.
Oh,
How thin?
Yes,
Is that like?
in the hope of radiating more.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's only about 1 millimeter or so thick. That's right off of the data sheets.
Typically, they don't heat up the water fast through the air. Yes.
So-
Maybe another reason. but sensor.
Yeah, definitely. Overcook the water while the rest of the system.
Yeah,
is-
yeah.
Definitely.
assuming this thing's frozen, say whatever number, if you've done the math, do you know how long this will take to warm up roughly?
Tried to do some initial calculations. Didn't have a good answer yet.
Okay.
We haven't done a thermal simulation, but in this case, while there's seeds, it can take forever.
Yeah,
There's-
there's no time requirement, so
Oh, that's-
as long as we're
we
positive,
want.
it takes as long, yeah.
Until we turn on those pumps and start pushing water over
You have all the time in the world.
all the time. in the
How
world.
do you verify
Yeah.
that your water is now liquid?
That's why I think your point was great. Putting a thermistor inside the water bladder would be very beneficial. We do have thermistors, they're just not next to the water, so that is a great call out. Thank you for that.
That'd be an issue if you froze the thermistor inside of the water bladder? Like for the
It's
wiring or
placement.
anything?
It is, we still need to obviously decide that. It probably wouldn't be in the bag,
Okay,
just on like the wall, because the aluminum will also absorb.
Right.
Or take heat out from the water, so. You can go to the next slide unless you have questions. All right, so we'll move on to our modes. So this is just a top-down view. I'm gonna break all this down in the next slide pretty quickly. But we do have 4 main modes, LR, or last resort mode, safe mode, and experiment mode, and a or actually, yes, mode. And you can click next, it's the same image as well.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
Yeah,
So our last resort mode is something we never want to be in, but its objective is to manage critical battery state in a tumble. So this will activate if we fall below 10% battery. The main computer, the bus heaters, and the GPS will be operational, and we will be slowly recharging. It will autonomously transition into safe mode when the battery reaches 20%. This did bring up a lot of red flags. However, in a tumble, we might not be able to command it from the ground. So we gave it an autonomous or commanded ability to promote into our safe mode. And our safe mode is our battery recovery state. So this will activate if we're below 40% battery. Then this will also be what we're initially in once our system checkout occurs. We will detumble if needed, and this will be a sun pointing mode to quickly charge our deployed solar panels. And we will transition into experiment mode upon ground command. So we won't promote into experiment mode because it's our most power hungry mode. where all the requirements are much more strict. Experimental mode, this is our primary mission operation, this will be our nominal mode, and the highest requirements for maintaining plant health.
Last resort mode, activations at battery, less than 10%, or no,
Yes.
yeah, less than 10%. Do you, how realistic is that, for your batteries? So I guess, question, do you guys have your batteries already selected?
Yeah.
So I would look at what the manufacturer says is like the lowest, I guess, like that's a discharge you can go to, I guess.
So yes,
So
10% would be relative. So it's not like zero voltage, it's the healthy, it's what your 0% is for a healthy discharge.
So healthy discharge is 20%. We'll be within 10% of that. Like we won't go below.
Like your
I
phone
see.
battery, it's not at 0 volts.
I guess it's
just
not
at
worded
that.
well.
okay.
Yeah, when you get there, word it to depth of discharge or battery voltage. Yeah.
So like, is that saying battery voltage is 10% greater than like, than like what the
The worst.
manufacturer like says to cut off at?
Yes.
Okay, okay,
Yes.
I see. Is that true for also safe
Yes.
mode? I see.
I just related it to standard
Okay.
batteries we use on the ground. We never discharge to 0%. It's usually 3.2 volts is 0%, but that's still passable.
So if last resort mode is a mode that you really never hope to be in, I'm gonna tag on to what Seth is talking about here, because he's been harping on this. You have it so it can be automatic,
Yes.
and that makes me a little nervous. Because if something happens and it just automatically goes to last resort, your plants will essentially die, right?
Yeah, it's a mode we don't.
So why, like, how strict is the automatic and why does it need to be automatic?
It's going to automatic because if it gets to that low of a power, our heaters and fans and other things within the ECS are going to drain the battery too quickly. We won't be able to recover.
We don't
If
want
we
to
can
lose.
automatically get to last resort mode, we can at least save enough battery life so that we can recover. The plants can go without heat and lights for a period of time. It's just a cloudy day to them. As long as we can get back to a positive power, we'll cover.
It sounds like they're prioritizing the satellite.
That's
Oh.
essentially.
We don't want to lose the satellite entirely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And even then, like you said, we can survive a period of time in this mode without completely dying. If it's 3 months, that's different, but
Plant dies, I mean, you still have the secondary objective of.
Exactly.
Okay.
we can still control the environment, so that's why we didn't make any of our requirements solely reliant on plant growth.
Well, actually, that brings me to a good point, I guess, because you'll have 25 seats. Is it like is there a possibility for, you know, one plant dies and then you could start again? I mean, I guess you would have resources, your resources would.
Well, you know, starting again once we begin.
So your mode diagram scares me in the fact that the only way to get to transmit receive mode is if you have first entered experiment mode, which makes me believe I cannot transmit or receive in safe mode.
Yeah,
that
it's
a-
linear.
Is
No,
that
yeah,
a
'cause it-
correct assumption?
Well, he's correct in that it appears that way, but that's not the intention.
Okay.
for-
Okay.
The
That's a very
idea
good
is
catch.
you could move right through it via command. It was
Okay.
just the way it was drawn.
Yeah,
So
add a
it's-
line that goes around.
When you're gonna do that, got very complex because you always want to be able to go in there, and then I have 500 lines. So yes, you could go straight from here into this mode.
Okay, it's
Maybe that
important.
follows different methodology. or
No, that's
a lot of
standard.
Other diagrams, but that's how we
But-
envision it.
Yeah, it's important to have the line or at least make a note in safe that it does have the ability to transmit and receive if you don't want to add that line.
Understood. Make it more clear, absolutely.
Are you turning off your receive at any point in these modes?
Possibly last resort. Because we're gonna tumble anyway.
Don't ever turn off your receive. That's
Transmit.
I'm thinking
That's
of the
spacecraft.
power budget.
Okay,
It's-
yeah, so definitely verify and ensure that whenever your satellite is on, you can talk to it.
Yes.
Maybe not hear back from it, but talk to it.
So that's why we have automatic or commanded out of this mode, because if you do manage to send a signal, you could.
What happens if it just, for some reason, the automation just goes haywire? Sorry, I'm harping on this. Like, what is how are you envisioning that your software is gonna get out of it if it kind of sees that, oh, I accidentally went into this mode, that's not what I want to be in, and how will that affect your mission, right? Does that kind of make sense?
I mean, any one of these modes, we have the ability to override through commands. Outside of-
Well,
Sure,
are you sure? Because what if you say, I want you to go into TX mode and immediately says, I'll go to experiment mode. And you say, I want you to go back to TX mode and immediately says.
Right, and like even if you command it, your automation might just go like, well, I don't agree, so like just after you command it, I'm gonna go back
So
to
like a
this
level
mode.
where you should be placed in the software.
Right, that's all I'm saying, is that like saying,
Okay.
leaving automated, like I think this flow chart is just not, it's very too simplified, because when you're kind of treating automatic and commanded here as like equal, does that kind of make sense? Where you want commanded to be higher priority than automatic, so then it's, yeah, exactly, so that's all I'm saying.
We thought about a possible loop, not exactly on par, but from here, reaching that 20% to promote or to go into a safe mode so that you don't immediately fall under that threshold when you activate all your power systems and keep
That
dropping
is-
and repeating the last
We
resort.
want the entry and exit criteria to have a separation and be able to modify them if needed. Because all the testing on the ground should prepare you for space, but space is will space, and it's actually trying to kill you. So in that case, you're gonna have to make sure that anything automated is tested and really thoroughly tested if you're on the ground, so you have confidence in it when you go to space.
Like your software is gonna be beefy, like there should be safes on safes for that if you're gonna have these things be automated.
And then the pointing out of separating the cutoff turn on period is a good idea.
Thankfully, again, it's literally called last resort for a reason. Safe mode is like by far, we've never even come close to needing a last resort mode. It's more along the lines of, like Emmy said, saving our spacecraft in like the absolute worst case situation. Yeah, that's the idea.
If you want someone to help you go through this autonomous stuff, UNP has been harping on one of my missions, autonomous promoting and everything for many years, and we've gotten them to stop harping because we have gotten it worked out. I can help you figure part of this out.
Scars to prove it.
And then just the last thing is our transmission mode, to communicate ground stations. And in this mode, we will turn the heater and LED off. This is only a short duration window, just a few minutes, but this will lower our power requirement to keep us positive and all. And then we can also extend and transceive in this mode if we need to debug at any given point in time. It's not limited to just transmitting.
You show your energy balance.
Yeah,
Okay.
Are you enforcing the short duration of safe mode?
like
Is
most of the
there-
mode.
Is there like a catch that says if I've been in safe mode for longer than however many hours, I have to turn the LEDs back on?
That was for transmission mode.
Oh, my bad. Sorry, totally confused.
So we're a little over halfway through the presentation and an hour 18 into like the time. So I'm gonna ask reviewers, hold the questions to the end. So write down your comments, keep them stored in your brain until the end. And yeah, you guys go.
No, write them down, don't store them in your brain.
Here's a quick like mission life example. It's very simple. So we launch, we have our silence period, then we detumble solar point on charge our batteries as we talked about. Then we heat our environmentally controlled system and phase one begins. This is when we start our water and then we start growing. So yeah, and then you crash at the end, but so yeah, and then uplink, downlink, and then end of life years. End of life cycle around 5 years.
There we go. All right. Go ahead, next slide.
An orbit example is what we're going to show now. So we'll be primarily solar tracking, as this is a very power hungry and we want to keep these plants alive, so we don't want to be risking having low power. We also prioritize transmitting when we are in between the Earth and the Sun so that we can be facing our solar panels and transmitting. This is not a requirement. As you can see in the top right, it is totally feasible to transmit at any given time. That's just an optional. And then we also have it to continue solar tracking in the eclipse so that there's less slewing needed once we exit the eclipse. We're already ready. The low level of our ConOps, like our ECS. So we'll start up here in the top left, collect data. You can see we have 3 loops here. These are our controlled values. So if we reach those values, we don't change anything. If we do need to change them, we'll like from the water pump, turn the LEDs on or off, or turn the heaters on and off, depending on what our PID loops require. And at the bottom, we have everything we're reading as well as constantly being checked. So pressure, CO2, humidity, photoresistor, soil moisture, temperature. And then if we are in our transmission mode, we will continue Flunator, transmit our image and sensor data, and then go back to sun tracking as soon as possible, and go back to collect data, which brings you back up to the top. If you're not transmitting your data, you just continue this loop, which monitors our environmentally controlled system and reads all the sensor data.
One last thing was there's a typo, 16 hours, not 6.
This is the general layout of our spacecraft exterior. As you can see, we have our 4 deployable solar panels on our zenith side, the positive z-axis. Not shown in this illustration because of its orientation is our GPS antenna, also on the zenith side. On the opposite side, nadir facing, is our S-band antenna so that we can maintain communications with our ground. And along our positive y-axis, along one of the sides, is where our star tracker will be located. This is oriented so that we do not get the interference from sunlight or reflected light from the Earth. Next slide. The interior of our craft layout, as you can see in the area of brown, this is our ECS and our roughly 4U of our entire system. Next to that is our second scintillation detector. Like I mentioned before, this is how we can measure the relative radiation from within inside the ECS to outside of it. We have our electronic power system with integrated power distribution, our transceiver located on our nadir facing side, and as mentioned before, our ADCS with Star Tracker. We have 2 onboard computers. The option was to do a more complicated onboard computer that could handle FRAM and the bit flips. But for such a short mission duration, it's much more economically feasible for us to just do 2 simple, more simplified, like Raspberry Pi 5 for our computers, and then we have a backup one in case something should happen to the first one. Our mass budget broken down by each of our components. Again, you can see our payload is definitely our heaviest component at about 4 kilograms of our total weight. This still keeps us well within what we need for our 6U form factor. We have a total of 12 kilograms that we can be. With our 25% increase, we're sitting at about 10.3 kilograms, but there is still a series of components that may need to be added and other factors. So while we're within our budget right now, we may not be in the future. So our volume.
Actually, I'm gonna back you up just so you guys going a little too fast.
Sorry, okay.
I just want to be able to digest the information.
Oh, okay. We have it broken down to as many of the components within the system and all of our sensors within our payload. This heater represents the one outside of our system. The heater inside the EPS is measured separately because they may be different size heaters, different types. Right now they are the same, but we're keeping them separated for clarification in the future. Our 2 Raspberry Pis. Currently, right now, we have 2 3U deployable solar panels and 2 6U deployable solar panels. We are considering putting a body-mounted solar panel on the zenith-facing side. We've actually also considered adding body-mounted solar panels under the deployable ones. So in case we get into a tumble, that we can still have a positive power generation, even when more power positive.
Just when you guys were talking about potentially putting these the 1-2U solar panel based on some.
Yeah, that's not included in here yet. Yeah, we spoke about that.
Yes.
And now volume budget, this is one of the harder ones to quantify because if I just took the volume of each component and added them together, it might not necessarily represent the actual way it's going to fit within the system. So we tried to have as detailed of a CAD model as we could. As you can see, everything does fit, but there's not a lot of wiggle room for any of these components. And obviously wiring and stuff like that isn't included in here. And all of that's going to congest the structure. Also, the insulation on our ECS right now is very minimal. And we were hoping to increase that to help reduce the radiation input, also to help create a cold biased environment so that we can control our temperature with our heaters only, and help by adding more insulation, by being able to create more of a separation, we can isolate that ECS from any other components within the system. But that will really only be able to happen if we do a 12 view. Our other option would be to decrease the payload, maybe not do 2 seed pillows, maybe not do 25 seeds, because the less seed, the more seeds, the more water, the less seeds, the less water. But ideally, we're thinking of going towards a 12 view. Downgrade.
All right, so we'll talk a little bit about power draw. In our last resort mode, it does appear that we will need to fix our RX being on, so thank you for that. Our onboard computer's on, but really everything else is off, just the GPS, the bus heaters, and the power system. So nothing special there. For safe mode, this is where we anticipate to lessen the requirements for the ranges. So instead of being at 20-25 degrees Celsius for plants, we increase that range to 15 to 40 degrees Celsius. That means we can keep our heaters on for less time. So essentially, maximize the amount of power we can generate and minimize the amount of power we can draw while still keeping the plants alive once the experiment begins. That's the whole purpose of this mode. In this, you can see that the heaters are on 50% of the time, assuming during eclipse that we run them 100% of the time, and are able to just use the heat from the sun while we're not in eclipse. We leave the lights off. We may change that in the future, but as of right now, the lights are off in this mode. All the sensors, the fans, the pumps are running. We do have the ability to talk to the spacecraft. GPS is on. Everything else is pretty standard. Oh, and the ADCS is on. That's really important so that we can solar farm. For our experiment mode, everything is the same in safe mode, except for those heightened parameters. So expecting more heater usage, more light usage. This is our most power hungry mode, drawing almost 32 watts, which is like significant. A key factor to mention here is that we ran with 20 watts for our heater. However, that it could be extremely variable once we do an actual thermal analysis. We, through some napkin math, have come up with this number of 20 watts, and it is on the more aggressive side as well. So it may be less, it may be more, but it's a pretty fair middle point of what we think it might actually take. And then for TXRX, again, we turn the lights off, we turn the heaters off, we run the transmitter, and we draw about 25 watts in this. Next slide. About power generation. So with all of those deployable solar panels, the main reason why our ADCS is on, even in safe mode, which is atypical to most spacecrafts, is we can generate a lot of power in this mode as well. So in last resort, we're tumbling. We can assume only a 1/6 of our actual maximum power generation. And then, so for safe and experiment, we generate the same amount of power, assuming that we are sun pointing. And then for TX mode, everything is flown down from our design requirements or our mission objective. So since we know power is a driver, we chose a TX only during, if possible, only during the point to where we are sun facing and can TX at the same time without additional slewing. So I chose to use 95% as a coefficient to estimate cosine losses left and right. But again, this is just an estimate, so please don't hold me too strictly to that. We'll have to do more research. And then for our battery, we chose a 100 watt-hour pack, again, for that additional margin. It is large. It is 2 strings of 4. It is off the shelf, so I think it's, I can't remember the name. But at 100 watt-hours, we need to reevaluate. Maybe we can get away with less. On the next slide, you'll see that we're power positive in every mode. So it may not be justified. We can reevaluate. Next slide. All right, so the main thing to talk about here, you can see our 4 different modes. Okay, so in last resort, we recover from the dip in about half the time. In safe mode, we recover very, very quickly. In experiment, we barely recover from the dip. So this is considering no margin. I guess I could point here. This is experiment mode, TX, safe, LR. And so this is without any margin really in our system right now. What that means is that if we were to introduce a margin, it would no longer be power positive in experiment mode, which necessitates safe mode. Again, keeping the mission alive, still able to recover from the dips. Those are the purpose. That is the purpose. Next slide. I'll switch back. For data budget, it's a pretty not intense budget for us. So this is assuming that we take 2 sets of 2 images every 6 hours. That means 16 images per day of a 12 megapixel camera. Those are going to be between 2 and 4 megabytes in size based on compression in JPEG format. Outside of that, we have the quality of health of all of our subsystems, assuming about 1 hertz. along with 20 sensors running at 1 hertz as well, which is, we don't need to run them that much. But again, assuming worst case, we have no need to go above 1 hertz. Then assume a 15% overhead for protocols, packet framing, for error correction. We're at about 88 megabytes per day, which is not very much. So we can get that all down in one pass if we needed to. We'll talk about that in the link budget. But even if we weren't to transmit for 30 days, we would not reach our maximum storage capacity. Therefore, I felt no need to draw a visual for the data budget. So some possible options for a rescope for us may be higher resolution images, though the mission doesn't call for it. The frequency of images, so we can take it twice as often, 3 times as often. Or more robust error correction strategies, more of that overhead for packet framing and error correction. Next slide. So similarly, flowing down from the data budget, our link budget is also very lax, but we are still transmitting images. So us using S-band, maybe we rescope to UHF band, but for us, images typically means S-band. We have our Endurosat S-band transceiver as well, along with their patch and antenna. Now, we are using a ground station as a service provider. Florida Atlantic University does not have their own ground station. We also really like the idea of being able to communicate at any point in time with our spacecraft. So using a network seems to be the most feasible solution for us. This assumes GFSK modulation, but all these things are a little bit subject to change. These are not requirements for us. These are parts that fulfill the need for our mission as of right now. And then doing some orbital calculations, it seems with a 10-degree elevation angle, we would have about 7 minutes per pass duration, which in order to get all of the data down that we need, we would have to have a data rate of 442 kilobits per second. Considering S-band is about 1 megabyte per second, we are more than clear on that front. And our link clears about 700 decibels, but this is just plug and play numbers for us from Amazon and from our data sheets.
So we've mentioned several future considerations throughout our presentation. One that I mentioned is adding body mounted solar panels along X and Y axis. As I said, this would improve our recovery if we enter into a tumble mode. We've also considered increasing to a 12U form factor. This would help accommodate our volume requirements. It would also add more surface area for solar panels to keep us more power positive even during our experimental stage. The way we are manufacturing our seed pillow is still up to be changed. Right now, we are more or less looking at what they've done on veggie and advanced plant habitat and just trying to reproduce that. And we really haven't gotten a chance to look into, is there a better way than that? Our plant selection right now is largely based on the research that's already been done at FAU. But as we continue to talk to veggie, if we find out that, tomatoes are what we have to be growing, then we may change that, which could affect a lot of other things. Also, if we go to a larger form factor, we may have that option. We need to add more redundancy to our system. Redundancy is good. We want redundancy. It will help maintain that we don't have problems along the way and that we can ensure mission success throughout the life of our system. One of the things, again, everything kind of comes back to our form factor, the thickness of our walls. This can affect exactly how much our isolation we have, how much radiation resistance that we have, and then what type of material we use for that insulation was brought up, that we could do something that maybe we need to double check the outgassing on that insulation. And all of this will also go back to our ECS thermal analysis. There's only so much we can do in the limited time that we're here. We're going to have to do extensive research on the thermal, and then every bit of this goes back to ground testing. Ground testing. We want to test as much of this before we get into space as possible so that we know that we're not going to fail once we get up there. Is that it?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, bring it on.
I would like to give praise for the fact that you really did a great job answering questions and everything in the beginning, but also for the fact that you used your Kennedy Space Center, veggie, you met them, contacts, you met them during the tour and you really utilized that. I really want to give you high praise for that. And so just quick comments on, I would like to see a redundancy flow chart, included in your ConApps. You also had Raspberry Pi 5s on slide 24 and so is that a typo?
For the ESP 32 in the maps budget.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I have just learned that Raspberry Pi 5s you should not use them.
Really?
So
Yeah.
Avery recommended that we should.
Pi 3 is about as high as I would ever recommend going.
Oh, really?
Unless you really need the power. So as you get to more modern processors, they have more and more smaller transistors. The smaller
Makes more like a
transistors,
bit flip.
more likely they are to get a bit flip and die.
Okay.
So the older you go on computers, actually, the better they are for space.
Got it.
And because,
2000, if you
Yeah.
went old school, like floppy disk level, like.
and because you have so many things you need to be taking into consideration, you should go with things that are proven.
Yes, so Pi 3s are proven.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pi-
And everything else, all my other comments can wait until you receive them later, so.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
My only comment is, so you don't have solar panels on your body, you only have deployables. So when you enter your last resort mode and you turn off your active sun tracking, it is now going to be very difficult, especially when you start just drifting at a rate like this,
Yeah.
to ever get back to power positive until you fully spin back around to hit the sun again.
That's why we
In which
really
case-
wanted to add body
Yeah,
mounted
so definitely
panels.
body mounted at them.
I actually mentioned that as well in mine, and one of the things that I recommended you should look at is structuring your satellite so that passive torques will bring you so that your panels are zenith. Now, that can cause other issues, so you could just go the route of adding more panels. But there are other ways you can do it if panels end up being prohibitive for whatever reason.
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so are you familiar with passive torques? Okay. So there are forces on your satellite in orbit that they're very small, but they will pull you in certain directions all the time. So in Leo, the biggest one is going to be gravity gradient.
Gravity gradient, okay.
Right. And so another question that I had was with your pointing, if you need fine pointing, because yes, you're sun tracking, but you have some freedom there. And from your link budget, it doesn't look like you have super directed comps either.
We don't need fine.
Right. So if you don't have big slewing requirements, but you are worried about your mega safe mode power flux, then you could set some of your stuff a little bit off of your geometric center so that it will weight you down over time. But I would only mess with that if you can't get panels on, because that's definitely a more dependable solution. Yeah.
Another thing to look to is if you could get that to work and even go to just magnetorquers only to get rid of reaction wheels, which would reduce your cost and volume. Durosat has they're basically 180-degree beam width S-band antennas. You pop one of them on each side, and now you have an omnidirectional S-band system. I know it works because I have several spacecraft. There's 8 of them that had an S-band antenna on each side and no active control, and they were using commercial ground stations if they would have ever flown. And
The sun pointing, like.
so you would need to figure out at that point is because if you drop reaction wheels and you go to just magnetorquer systems, you don't want to slew to a ground station because it's a lot harder to get back. So once you maintain that position, now you're just using your magnetorquers for station keeping, and now it doesn't matter where you are, you're able to hit a ground station.
So we can just stay sun pointing the whole time.
Yes.
And then so not have to sleep.
And not have to sit for ground stations, especially if you're using commercial, because now these are really high gain dishes you're communicating with.
Yeah.
As opposed to a small, low gain one you have at a university, which is part of the reason that this system works.
I like that.
Yeah.
So go back to slide 25. And so, I think I heard you say, Beatus, did you say that you want the vehicle to be cold biased or the ECS?
The ECS.
So, okay, so, then,
We would possibly move it to this side. The only
I
reason
was
it's
just about to
pushed
ask.
where it is right now is for the transceiver to be where it is. With a 6U, we're kind of limited. Now, if we go to a 12U, we could shift some things around.
yeah, I was just about to say, like, you put on your,
I put it on the wrong side.
Our
Yeah,
game
yeah, yeah.
probably never worked in 6U with all these components inside.
I would say at least it is behind all of the solar paneling, so that's gonna block some of that thermal, but yeah, it would be further away.
Can you, oh, sorry.
your mass, something like mass website.
That one.
To hear that you guys had some other components you think about adding, can you elaborate what other things are captured?
The hyperspectral camera, I don't have our water manifold currently in this layout.
Our actual EPS isn't in here either. We have the batteries, but not the
Yeah.
actual EPS.
Yeah. What else? Yeah, some of the other sensors, the
Oh, yeah.
ethylene sensor was one that we wanted to add, and actually not added on here because we didn't, we still haven't finalized on it. It was our moisture sensor for our seed packs. They're not heavy, but they are a component that aren't.
And a lot of the sensors are grams, so.
Couple liters.
Like the size of it might change.
Yeah, and size might change. Also, whatever's gonna be happening with our humidity control. Right now, we have a series of desiccant packs in there. There's desiccant cards in there. But whether that's enough desiccant or not, or if we switch to a cold plate, that can affect that weight budget.
It's a nit because I guess you guys are probably really gonna help you, but I'd also, how do you capture harnessing? Asking?
It's not captured, it's in the margin, that's why the margin's there. We have fasteners, but there's not much harnesses.
Currently, quite well below our allowable weight, but I
You're
think
gonna
our,
jump to some of the things you're talking about, probably adding.
yeah,
But one other quick thing too, you mentioned using AWS as your comm system, ground station. That gets very expensive very fast.
Got it.
So just track that.
unfortunately, we don't have a ground.
Yeah, you're kind of between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Could use Atlas.
Yeah, Amazon was the first one that saw met our needs. We didn't factor costs into that choice yet, so.
Azure
really-
Space, I think, also has like a student version as well.
Oh, that's great. Okay, cool.
We are trying to create the aerospace program at FAU, help get it off the ground, so.
We'll have one soon if this goes well.
Yeah.
Nice. Can you go to the energy table?
Yes, balance.
Graphs?
I think it's back.
Down.
Forward.
No, it's forward.
Oh, forward, yes.
Forward. Two more, one more.
Perfect, that one. I like where you guys have started, but I would really like to see a day in the life. So
Yeah,
walk me
that's
through your
next step.
concepts. See how much you are actually in safe versus experiment and transmit, or how many times you actually get sent all the way to LR.
Well, in this example, because we recovered from experiment mode, our day in life, that's our most expensive mode. So we never go down in our day in life as of right now. But that's why I mentioned the margin. So if I do incorporate a margin, I would love to see how well we recover from those dips as well. It's not my to-do list.
And so with this, definitely start, I like how you walk through, like, jump past where, assume your solar panels are already deployed.
Yep.
And start there and just walk me through it. So you'll have, are you hoping to experiment and come back?
We-
Or just walk through it?
Start in safe mode to begin the heating.
Right.
Right, start in safe mode to
And then command into experiment, right?
command to experiment to begin the watering, and then assuming there is parts of our power budget that I missed and that additional contingency, we will be able to batteries will slowly decline because we're staying in experiment mode,
Right.
right? So we're not fully recovering from those dips, but then eventually, once you reach a certain battery threshold, we go back into safe mode, keep the plant still alive till we recover to a certain point, and then alternate back and forth.
Right, and so what I'm getting at is go through and go from safe to experiment, and then act as if, run the scenario as if you're downlink, okay, now you're back,
Yep.
downlink, and just put it all in a graph.
Yep.
Cause then it's really.
Yeah, I want that one too.
Yeah,
You asked about a day in the life, and it's, yes, we are primarily
Yeah.
solar pointing here, and both modes do the same thing. The only difference is the requirements for inside the ECS, and like you said, a big assumption is that we have the 20 watts, which could be overkill by
Right.
a lot. So if that turns out to be 5 or 10, then you fully recover with a lot of margin in experimental mode.
I think what Sarah's trying to touch on is that, I think for the power generation, we would like to see it in order of the modes.
Absolutely.
Back again,
Yep.
which would give a better picture as well, if you would need, you know, what your battery will be and everything else.
Like show why we go into safe mode for how long, go back to.
Yeah, like experiment with the modes of it and like show it in like a wider span, right?
Definitely.
My comment, were you good, Sarah?
Yeah.
My comment on this slide, it's kind of whenever you went here. Transmit when solar pointing and nadir. I'd be curious to see, like, how long can you actually do that? Cause yeah, this is like a best case scenario, we could transmit and get our max charging, but actually implementing this on an ADCS, it's like, okay, my primary direction is my ground station and my secondary direction is my pointing. Like, I'd be curious to see if you can only do that scenario for like, I don't know, 3 minutes. Like how would your ADCS respond?
Yeah.
If those directions start becoming wonky and they're not like that, you know what I mean?
It is an optimal
Yeah.
position to happen, but since our transmission is only 7 minutes long, if it's not here, then it can be anywhere else, and we are power positive and
Yeah.
to maintain that.
I just didn't want you guys to assume that like
No, because like what if
that's
the
gonna be
Pacific Ocean's
simple
there?
to an
Right.
ADCS.
Right.
Yeah. And then for the whole like S-band and not UHF, did you do a UHF link budget?
No, I started with S-band just because we were doing images and
Okay.
traditionally the images go first.
Okay, I'd encourage you to like actually do it to drive that
See
assumption.
if we can get it.
And then I'd also be curious to see like on your data budget, can you get away with UHF?
Considering that we can store for 30 days without ever transmitting, I imagine we could get away with UHF, because it's only really the sensor data that's time sensitive. The images just need to come down eventually, so. It's a good chance we could. Then just one image at a time or throughout the rest of the duration of the life of the mission if we needed to.
Yeah, I guess I would encourage you to like
At least
double
find out.
check that assumption of like, oh, since I'm doing images,
Yeah.
I use S-band. It's like, that's not a good decision, in my opinion. And like, if it is driving you to do S-band, consider what Michael suggested with the 2. Yeah.
On that note, we have 13 minutes, so do you guys have any questions for us?
I had a couple, but I don't remember what they were.
Is this a good idea? As far as maintaining solar tracking in the eclipse
Oh
as
yeah,
well?
that's a good one.
So I don't know how a ADCS is gonna do that, because like it's like if your sun sensor is like, hey, point at the sun, and then the sun sensor says, oh, there's no sun. I don't know what it does.
I mean, we have a bus in the air right now that does this.
Okay.
It's possible.
Yes, we have our Star Trek
Right.
as well.
Also,
It just probably like
GPS, doesn't the GPS needs to face zenith, doesn't
So we were doing this
GPS needs, well, what altitude are you at?
450.
Well, actually, no matter what, your GPS needs to point up.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So like
so
in that
doing this, we have
configuration,
no
you have no
GPS.
GPS. There you would have GPS if it's pointing.
The GPS is on the solar panel.
Oh, it's on the
side,
solar, so you only have GPS
yes, you don't get a lock when you're
in that
What-
area about there.
But the real question I wanted to know about the trade of what is the advantage of doing this versus just letting it be earth pointing throughout so that we can transmit easily.
It's
Like,
the power
do we gain a
generation.
lot? Do we gain a lot
Yeah.
of power gen?
So do you guys have access to SDK through,
Not that I know
no, any other? platforms
Free
as well?
Flyer University, send them an email
It's just-
from your EDU email, and you will get a free file license.
what were the other orbit ones?
Free Flyer. That's the one I know they can get for free.
So STK, like for 14 days, you can get a free trial with like any
Maybe prep
email.
for
With
SMR.
promo code NordVPN.
Yes. If
Promo
you,
code UNP.
if you're kind of proficient with it, you can kind of like get through it. And I know that Trip and Joseph have STK experience.
Okay.
And other schools have been doing it too.
And because you need so much power, that was, like Sarah said, this is why you would need to do this.
Right, that analysis is just one of those that will confirm, because right now it's very choppy on how you have to do it, but with those modeling softwares, they can really just take a leg up and help you guys out with that.
Because also you don't need to be like you can rotate like, you know, if this is the sun,
Yeah, we can be spinning. in
Yeah.
both places.
you're still getting like, I don't know. Yeah.
If you had a comment?
Is that not what it's like?
On the topic of ADCS, I didn't see a super detailed breakdown anywhere. Do you have wheels as well as a tracker?
There's wheels in there.
Okay, do you need wheels in a tracker?
Well, from the comments that we got, maybe we don't. We don't have any stringent pointing requirements, other than we knew we wanted to absolutely maximize our solar generation. So that can be accomplished with like a core sun sensor.
Yeah,
But
and
then
that
if we don't
and
need fine
Earth
pointing, then we
Yeah,
probably don't need
and-
wheels.
Haters.
And we look at exploring that solution at the other.
Okay. I was also just wondering, just for my own curiosity, if you're developing your own structure,
Yes.
These, yes, yeah.
This will be. our-
Well, I mean, like the CubeSat.
Oh, no, we actually,
When we are probably definitely gonna be switching to a 12U, and we've already started looking at, and I don't remember the one offhand, but I already had models.
Awesome.
Files downloaded, so, yeah. The pre-made rail system.
If you do start designing those yourselves, definitely get in contact with actual mechanics. And the shop people, cause they'll actually tell you yay or nay versus this looks really pretty.
Yeah.
Tolerances, yeah.
just wanted to look and see if I had any additional questions.
Norm, there's a battery capacity requirement on ISS, right? The 80 watt hours? Yeah, so I just wanted to bring up that, you have 100 watt hours. If you're looking at ISS.
We're already
Pretty
off
much not gonna be
ISS.
on ISS.
Okay.
We're already out.
Your orbit that you guys had up there was definitely access compatible. I'd love you to believe.
Compatible, but I don't think the pressure can go up on ISS. That's what I was.
It can, no, he said it was just, much more stingy, like your requirement. was much
Like I
higher.
said, SpaceX was like
SpaceX, well, most launch vehicles, they don't, it's easier to get approved for a pressure vessel. We launch pressure vessels all the time with the ISS.
okay, understood.
People
Thank you.
But then there's a battery capacity requirement.
Well, so you do, so if you're above 80 watt hours, you trigger additional testing in your batteries. Right? So
Well-
it's not a no.
Just to consider, yeah.
As of right now, we have no need for the 80 other than in case like everything goes really wrong. So we may simplify that. One question I had was it too much of a stretch for including AFRL and Space Force into our benefactors who would
So
benefit from
the
a
fact
successful
that
mission?
Robbie said that USAFA is doing plants at the SERB, I'm like, I didn't know about that, so,
Yeah.
like,
Just like your mission objectives aren't focusing on the plant, it's talking about all the environment and all the data surrounding it. You're solid, like.
So
I just want to I wanted to make sure I wasn't, overstepping on
No.
saying you may be a benefactor.
Like, I think it's totally there. Like, the relevance portion is like another discussion, but like, yes, at least for mission concepts with FAU for you guys, like, yeah, that's totally.
Okay.
Just to circle back on the ISS, I wouldn't sleep on the ISS. It's a consistent launch. It's actually the vibration environment is the lowest you're gonna see out of any. It basically puts you in airbags as you go up there as cargo to the station. The environments are super low. You're gonna be in a controlled environment, so you won't be out there just freezing forever prior to deployment. It may take a while for the astronauts to say, okay, I guess we finally will deploy you. But other than that, it's a pretty good ride.
And-
I wouldn't sleep on it.
So please consider submitting to the National Science Foundation and stuff.
Yeah.
Something like this, especially since
said that.
you
Yeah.
said PhD, you said masters, and you would possibly like to be paid.
Yeah.
I would really consider this cycle. It seems like you've put in a lot of thought about this,
Yeah.
so I think you'd be probably, yeah.
And
It doesn't stick out. If you're wondering, that doesn't stick out.
No,
Yeah, he commented, I increased the length of the lens just so
Nah,
that you
nah,
could
that's
see
good.
it.
that's what I'm saying. So it's just a comment that's gonna help your future integrators.
Uh-huh.
So make sure your coordinates match the deployer coordinates.
Uh-huh.
My understanding,
They're good on
I
that.
heard that and you said it's another presentation.
They're good on
Yes.
this?
Yeah, you're good. X is out. That's the big one you gotta match.
Oh, we
Oh,
knew
wait,
that,
you may
actually.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we planned that all.
I heard you say that with another university, and I was like, we need to.
And then another thing, when you guys are going from a 6 to 12U, there are access ports when you're in the deployer. Check the deployers and see what those access ports are. So that's where actually we're gonna.
Right.
Charge the battery.
Yeah, charge the battery. You guys are in a predicament where, well, obviously it can be in a pressurized vehicle. And so you can't drain that bladder or refill it while you're just waiting for the launch, because guaranteed it's gonna get delayed.
Yeah.
Yep.
But that's one of those do cost risk analysis and go from there, see if that's okay.
One of the trades I had was our solution of redundant onboard computers acceptable minus the Raspberry Pi 5 versus 3.
If you can figure out how to do it.
Yeah,
You're gonna need someone,
a lot of wiring.
and somebody that knows how to do this in between two computers. Somebody that's.
Avery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Free.
and honestly, like, just logically, like, if there's a bird in the air and then a radiation thing hits, yeah, you'd probably want a redundant system to store memory too, like.
Yeah. We tried to really do the systems engineering component of it, right? And if our constraints don't drive a $15,000 onboard computer, then, why not achieve it with two $100 for
Yeah.
$40 computers?
It would be good because you can definitely test that on the ground, but I'm pretty sure Avery would love to help you with this.
He recommended
Probably-
this to us.
Yeah,
as a
he
solution,
would-
So,
He would probably know how to do it in a lot more detail than,
yeah, he even cited like spacecraft that are currently doing this. So he's, yeah, very.
yeah,
Very
so
proficient.
please reach out to him. He would be more than thrilled to talk to you. and
Okay.
Help you with that.
Is there anything missing on my power draw that maybe you guys can see that I didn't factor
Are your
in?
lights on? Yeah, that's a question. How long are your lights on?
This is a typo. So as right now it's 50% in experiment mode. It should be 66% of the time. And then we're also considering, if possible, running them some of the time in safe mode. It would all depend on, like what Sarah said, getting our real day in the life. Because if we're in safe mode for too long, we may need to turn on our lights for some portion.
And not in your power draw, but in your power generation, you would need to consider degradation and efficiency of your solar panels.
Yeah.
100%.
Which goes into that margin and stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, why we need.
I wasn't sure. I did the math myself of making it with cell by cell on my own, and I got similar numbers to the output from their data sheet. That was accounting for efficiency, so I wasn't sure if the number they gave me already accounted for standard efficiency off
Data
the data
sheets
sheet.
will always show you the perfect number
Gotcha.
Okay, so then
because
we can
each solar
assume,
cell is going to be
There's the AM
Different.
zero, AM one stuff too that Avery was talking about.
I remember that, yeah.
Go back, sorry.
Yep,
To answer
sorry.
your question, yeah, GPS is receive, not transmit. You need, yeah, it doesn't need to be 100%, especially in last resort. I would recommend, like Sarah said, receive, at least receive.
It's just since it's only 1.6 watts.
Yeah,
It's on the low end. I know you guys are in the time.
Straight
crunch
off the data
of
sheet.
watts, But
I even emailed them.
no, that's a good thing. I'm saying it's on the low end, so turn it on.
Oh, okay,
turn it on.
Yeah.
gotcha.
But I know you guys already are power constrained, but yeah, definitely you want to be able to talk to your satellite all the way up until it dies.
And I think with our proposal of safe and experiment mode, we're actually have more margin than I'm like really like allowing for. Like I know it's ideal to stay in experiment mode all the time, but our mission still works, even if we have to use safe mode for considerable periods. So we can exploit that.
You just drop like 20 watt hours. So
Yeah.
like, assuming you're not gonna be at like, 100% topped off, like.
Yeah.
Where are you willing to, that was my next question, is like, where are you willing to?
What's the cutoff?
Yeah.
Yep.
But on that note, feedback will be provided shortly.
Thank you so much.
I
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good work, guys.
Starting will be some.
Thanks a lot, Howard.
I want to thank you for your comments about the vibration in the water. level.
Yeah.
That's definitely something we should.
Just like
All right, guys, thank you.
All right, good job, guys. See ya. All right.
Okay, I'm muting the mic. Thank you for those online.